my shadow. You're ahead of me instead of behind me.
Boy, wait, this is not anything.
Welcome to First Unitarian Church, where our mission is to explore the eternal, nurture community, and pursue the common good. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are in your spiritual journey, and whatever your life circumstance, you are welcome here.
Today, we remember a tragic day in our history as a congregation, a community, and a country. On this day in 1995, men driven by hate took the lives of 168 people, including 2 beloved members of First Unitarian Church. 680 more people were injured, and the lives of countless others were changed forever. We remember that horrible event, the human potential for evil that led to such unimaginable loss. But we also remember the heroism and the human potential for good that was on display that day and in the days after. We remember the courage of people like our own Dr. Andy Sullivan, who risked his own life to save the life of another person who was pinned under several layers of concrete. We remember the caring leadership shown by people like Reverend Fern Stanley, who was the interim minister at the time, RE Director Terry Ward, Board President Pat Corley, and many others. And even as we mourn, we offer gratitude for the love of this community that has persisted through it all.
We light the chalice as a symbol of our sacred time together. The burning chalice represents the light of reason and science, the warmth of loving community, the cleansing heat of justice, and the flame of hope.
Our opening hymn, you know well, it's a standard at First Unitarian, number 12 in the hymnal, O Life That Maketh All Things New. This is a recording from last September. Every Sunday when we are together in church, we take an offering. All of the cash and designated checks from that offering go directly to external nonprofit organizations doing good work in our community. Even when we must be physically distant, we need to remember that the important work of our partner organizations must continue. This month, our Change for Change partner is the Homeless Alliance. At this point, I'll play some music and give you all some time to make your donations to Change for Change. You may wish to make your donation using a credit card online on our website at #1uc.org. Or if you prefer, this could be a good time to find your checkbook, write out a check, and put it aside to mail to First Unitarian tomorrow morning. Let today's offering reflect our highest aspirations for the work of the church in the world. Our first reading is by Bob Hurst from the Oklahoma City Unitarian, the April 25th edition.
Thank you, Diane. I remember those days far too well. I was at home, just by introduction, I was at home recovering from surgery when suddenly the house shook, the windows rattled, and I thought someone had exceeded the speed of sound. When I learned the truth, I reached out on the UU listserv. Anybody remember listservs? But there was one for UUs, and it was a discussion of all things relating to UUs. And the people reached out to me, and I reached out to them, and I connected us to, UU congregations all over the country. And you may remember our walls were papered with blessings and sympathy and even help from all those congregations. So I wrote this for the newsletter. When I heard of the bomb, I felt for the moment everything I held to be holy had been shattered. As an existentialist and humanist, I feel that all we really have when the cold existential winds blow is the campfire and our fellow human beings around it. And I felt that one of them had poured water on the fire. And yet, my faith is renewed and strengthened because we are all connected. A friend from California relit my fire with hers. I discussed many matters spiritual and political with other UUs, sort of a virtual coffee hour. And I told them about Mary and Susan and about what we were trying to do and how this affected us all. A very beautiful lady, Kok Young of Los Alamos, asked me for information as to who Mary and Susan were as people, because she wanted to light candles for them. I called our friends and I shared that love with UUs everywhere. Candles were lit all over this nation for Susan and Mary, and for us here, and for the faith we hold in common. And just as importantly, collections were taken up. As many of my friends here and elsewhere have said, the most important thing for us is to keep the faith, to keep witnessing, and I use that word deliberately, for that faith, and to keep working to uphold those principles of ours and to find the common ground with our fellow human beings. We can never know why, but if there is a world in which insane things such as this bombing do not occur, it is up to humanity and humanity alone to create that world. If we can learn to transcend creed and race, to build on those common human values, we can create that world, not from lowest common denominator pablum, but from the real values of humanity. Did anyone else besides me notice that substituting love for God in the memorial service Sunday made it true for them? Or Christian ministers talking about the worth and dignity of every individual? If we can do this, life wins and death loses. The oldest literary fragment in the English language, Beowulf, is about the battle between life and death. Keep the faith, brothers and sisters.
Thank you, Bob. Richard Allen was minister at First Unitarian from 1980 to 1994. Lois Allen became music director soon after their arrival. Dick Allen passed away in 2017, and Lois now lives in California. This is a letter that she wrote to the choir after learning about the bombing. Lois pre-recorded this for us.
Dear choir, I was in Florida and Dick in Pasadena, both of us watching TV in horror and frantically hoping to get a glimpse of somebody we knew. It was impossible to get through on the phone, and I finally reached Becky Talent's secretary, and she said Nancy Kane had just called and told me about Mary and Susan. The jumble of emotions at once saddened about Mary and Susan, and at the same time relieved that Nancy and Becky were okay. Dick reached Terry Ward, and then Dick and I called each other and compared notes with each detail as we reached other people, and other people reached us. We were both there with you in spirit and wish we could have been there physically. There was sure a need for giving and getting hugs. I caught Ruthie and Bob Hurst and Maureen Harvey for a moment on TV at the church, and Lynna Robinson in an interview, and Canterbury, and David Packman at the memorial service. I peered at each familiar face, relieved to see them, and my pain was a little abated, taking comfort in seeing so many familiar faces. Everywhere I go, people react to my connection to OKC with something: sympathy, reaching out, curiosity instead of the usual blank response. They say, are people really like that in Oklahoma? So ready to jump in and do the impossible? So ready to help? Yes, you sure are. My tears still come often, unbidden, at odd times, as I'm sure yours do. I miss you all so much. I love you, Lois.
Soon after that terrible day, Unitarian Universalists all around the world learned of our two members who died in the bombing, Mary Renty and Susan Farrell. This is the message that was sent out about Mary and Susan. It will be read by two of their dear friends, Celeste Fleming and Luann Faulkner Schneider.
Mary Renty was 42 and had lived all her life in Oklahoma City. She was an administrative manager with HUD and had worked since high school. Her daughters, Melissa and Melody, are part of the high school and junior high youth groups. Mary taught RE. She loved Scrabble and told outrageous tales with a straight face. Her death was ironic because Mary hated nobody, judged nobody, and was kind to everyone.
Luann?
Susan Jane Farrell was 36 years old and an attorney for HUD. She was a lithe and beautiful dancer who danced many forms, but her favorite was belly dance. Susie was raised on a farm near Chandler, and every Sunday drove to Chandler to have lunch with her grandmother. She owned a small house in Edgemere that she shared with her 3 cats, and there she tended a beautiful garden full of flowers and herbs, blooming year-round. Her car had a bumper sticker which said, "Practice random acts of kindness," and that is what she did.
The service marking the first anniversary of the bombing included a reading of the poem "Braced Against the Wind" by Oklahoma poet laureate Carol Hamilton. Maureen Harvey will read it for us today.
Nothing gentles down from a mild heaven here. We are always braced against the wild wind. We were ever hand in hand as far as the eye could see. Cataclysms are the story. Our cities sprang up overnight, are flattened at a tongue lashing by clouds and bushwhackers and Bonnie and Clydes, struck fast and hit against the land, stretched and pegged flat to the 4 corners of the earth. We do not cower at disaster. We join hands, sing hymns. We share tears and bend our backs raising a neighbor's barn. Do not think your abrupt terror will destroy us. Wide horizons stretch our vision. We do not believe in limits. We shift with the red dust, dance golden like the wheat fields. We believe. We move on. We bend and dance on the tall grass. The prairie sings our pain. The land shouts our praise. The wind calls us together.
Reverend Fern Stanley was the interim minister at First Unitarian from 1994 to 1995, and she returned for another interim in 2000. This is an excerpt from her obituary that was printed in the Chicago Tribune. On the day of the Oklahoma City bombing, in April 1995. Reverend Fern C. Stanley was just a few blocks away from the Murrah Federal Building, where the terrorist attack took scores of lives and injured hundreds more. Reverend Stanley, then an interim minister at First Unitarian Church of Oklahoma City, was on a walkway near the church during the explosion. Although unhurt, she was thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. In the weeks that followed, Reverend Stanley was called upon to help heal the psychological and emotional wounds of the community, as well as a congregation that lost several of its members in the bombing. She understood the healing process and had an amazing ability to deal with grief, said her daughter, Kay Shores. She had a special talent for helping people pick up the pieces of their lives and gently move on. Reverend Stanley, 68, who most recently served as interim minister at Unity Temple Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Oak Park, died of cancer Friday, May 23rd, 2003, in West Suburban Hospital in Oak Park. Ed Dykus was a longtime member of the choir at First Unitarian, and he served in many leadership roles, including president of the congregation. He was a judge, a journalist, and a poet. This is a poem that he wrote on the first anniversary of the bombing. There is a vacancy in my skyline. When I go out the gate and turn east on 4th, St. Joseph's spire is still there, stretching for the sky, and the slab-sided bulk of Regency Towers. But in between is nothingness, where once there was something. It is like a crater left in the gum by a departed tooth. How can a single molar leave such a giant gap? The tongue of my memory keeps senselessly returning to probe the space, not accepting that the building and the lives it held are gone. A year slipped by. The place is not as tender as it was. But even if they build something else, the gap will never quite go away. The day after the bombing, Claudia Cochran began a series of letters to her family in which she shared her experience. These letters concluded nearly a year later, on April 11th, 1996, with this epilogue.
It was on Wednesday, April 26th, that the world stood still at 9:02 a.m. to remember the dead and honor the rescuers who were even then continuing to sift through the rubble. 12 minutes, I thought. I was 12 minutes away, though for the difference it made, it might as well have been an eternity. It occurred to me that after Kathy Solowski and Noel Osborne, the closest person to the bombing that I knew was me. And yet, how could I compare myself to Kathy, who had watched the very floor fall away from her along with her friends and colleagues, or Noel, who had shed blood and inhaled smoke? For so many days, we looked to the north from our vantage point at Grant Thornton on the 12th floor. We saw our city wrapped in police tape until it looked like a demented Cinco de Mayo festival. We saw the columns of uniformed cleaning people led into the buildings in the complex. Virtually every car on every thoroughfare had its headlights on, a citywide funeral procession Some of us looked for signs of our cars and watched the tents where the grisly work of identifying the bodies continued. By Wednesday, I had agreed to borrow an old van that Bob and Jean Hurst had offered to let me use. When I asked how I could ever repay their kindness, Jean just said, "Don't bring it back." But in spite of its age and cosmetic flaws, it was beautiful to me. It was early evening when I dropped Bob off at their house and began the errands I'd had to put off during the past week. I drove out to a grocery store and bought some bags of fruit to drop off at Feed the Children. Then I thought I'd drive downtown to plan the trip to the work the next day, since so many of the streets were still closed. Dusk was beginning to fall as I drove east on Reno. I noted with satisfaction that the Liberty Bank building had turned on its cross lights. One of the tallest buildings in the downtown area, Liberty has large fluorescent lights in the shape of a cross built into each of its 4 sides. They are usually reserved for the Christmas season, but there they were, shining brightly. How many people will see them from the highway in town, I thought, and be comforted by this symbol of hope to so many. While I was downtown, I thought I might as well check on my car once again. The last time I had checked, on Monday, I'd been warned away from the area by a bullhorn until I explained what I wanted. At that time, I had been sent to a makeshift office on 4th Street, but now officers there directed me back to the place on 6th Street, where I had walked the previous Thursday. This time, I drove over, but was turned back at the intersection by a REACT volunteer. Trying to impress me, he said the reason the cars weren't being released was that the temporary morgue was set up all around them. I turned back to the highway, trying not to gag, as I suddenly remembered that my cashmere coat was in the back seat of the car. The black coat.
Well, we are plagued with technical problems today. We're going to try to get Claudia back. And in the meantime, I'll go ahead and I'll pick up where she left off. The black coat that Mark had given me for my birthday one year when things were good, that he had paid too much for, that we had laughed over because my birthday is in August, and he had made me try it on in the sweltering heat. Purple was streaking the sky as night fell, and I conjured up the smell of death going deep into the fibers of a coat, soft as love once had been. You're becoming a little panicky. It's just that REACT guy in his blunt way. Visit a friend before you go home. Go to Warren's. Go be with somebody. I turned the van past Warren's, feeling dread clutch at me as I realized he wasn't at home. Tears began to flow. Pat, another friend, lived close by, so I headed up 22nd Street. At Chartel, a squad car was pulled up in a front yard, lights flashing. The fear tightened its grip. Can't we ever get away? Uniforms and violence and destruction and horror. Do you want to go home? Yes, but not right now. I need someone, people, friends. Night had fallen completely when I turned around and crossed Chartel. Not 2 blocks from the squad car, I was met by the screams of a fire siren and 2 hook and ladders in front of an apartment house ablaze. A war zone. I'm living in a war zone. By this time, I was crying and shaking so hard. How can you go to Pat's like this? But the van was driving itself. When Pat wasn't home either, it turned and headed for the church. Just go home. I want to be home. Why am I driving to the church? Is the Hearst van just taking me there? What will I find there? They'll think I'm a crazy woman. They'll probably be right. By the time I pulled up next to the back door, I couldn't see. Tears were streaming down my face, and coming from my chest were horrible howls that I could barely check. I stumbled through the back door and onto the landing and heard music, angels singing. It can't be. It's Wednesday and choir practice is on Thursday. You should know, you're in the choir. Only the adult ed class meets on Wednesday and they don't sing. Still shaking, I listened, feeling more and more as if I'd stepped into a guidepost story. Is this revelation? It can't be. I'm a Unitarian, for Christ's sake. No, wait, that can't be right. But the most beautiful human sounds I had ever heard continued, juxtaposed with the most horrible sobs coming from my own throat. Downstairs. It's coming from downstairs. I stole halfway down and sat like a child up past her bedtime and looked into the room. It was the women's group, but there were men in it too, and they were moving in a circle, doing a chant. I saw my own friends, Lana, Joe, Robert, Eva, Alicia. The leader was instructing them to cradle someone in their arms, someone who needed them desperately and whom they were loving and caring for. It's me. It's me. Out here on the stairs, quaking and crying so hard. Go into the circle. Be the one they're caring for. But I couldn't. I was too weak and afraid that if I went in, the music would stop, and I couldn't bear that. So I just sat on the stairs, mouthing the words, "It's me. I'm right here," and reaching out my arms to them. Joe looked out and saw me reaching and shaking. At the end of the chant, she and Lana came and held me and let me cry and howl, eyes streaming and nose running. Denise, the leader, came out along with some high school girls. Ava and Alicia were especially tender. I wondered if they had ever seen an adult so anguished and out of control before. Joe talked to me about grief and the need to grieve, lessons I thought I'd learned long ago. She and Lana have both lost children and know firsthand the pain of loss. Joe said the kind of crying I was doing indicated a deep need to do it, to let it out. She said it was safe to continue to cry there, but I was too frightened that if I gave into it, that I'd never come back, never stop howling like some wild thing in a trap. Of course, I did stop eventually. With the help of these good people, I made it home that night to the comforting place of my own, to which my mind had been urging me the entire time. If I am changed by the experience, it is this. I no longer question my feelings or my right to have them. If there is a message in all of this, it is one of gratitude. I am grateful for the church, the space, the music, the learning, but most of all, for the love and support of friends. To them, I simply say, thank you. Our final president of the congregation in 1995.
In the year following the bombing, most Oklahoma City churches and many in outlying communities decided to ring their church chimes. "168 times at 9:02. Remembering those who had died. Our church was one of many who continued to remember it at 9:02 on April 19th. Before George Bauer's generous donation of the church carillon, I would use our church's organ bells to ring 168 times. 168 was something I wrote for the church newsletter on April 23, 1996. 168. Diane Broyles called early Thursday evening. Pat, I forgot I have a meeting Friday morning at 8, and I won't be able to ring the chimes at 9:02. Will you do it? It was a simple request, and since I was the one who had requested we ring the chimes, it wasn't a problem. I arrived at church Friday morning at 8:15, turned on the organ, and selected the chime note I would ring 168 times. 1, 2, 3. The 9:02 hour approached. I was somewhat surprised to see that several people, eventually about 20, came down and sat in the sanctuary or courtyard or front porch. 23, 24, 25. I sat down at the organ and turned my small radio to KOMA so I would know when to begin. 48, 49, 50. When the service downtown paused for 168 seconds of silence at 9:02, you could hear in the background the sound of a small child crying. 60, 61, 62. Then the Air Force flyover and the first sounds of bells from a downtown church. I began. It was such a simple task. Chime middle C 168 times. 86, 87, 88. I had to remain focused. I couldn't lose count. 101, 102, 103. If I stopped and thought about what I was doing, I'd lose it. 137, 138, 139. All those people gone. It's really been a year. It happened only yesterday. 155, 156, 157. I'm almost there. It's almost over. Then 166, 167. My mind paused. This was it. 168. It was over. My eyes filled with tears.
In the days after April the 19th, the congregation received a flood of love and support from Unitarian Universalists all around the country. Well over 1,500 individual cards, letters, emails, and telegrams. Among them was this prayer. Sadly, there's no name to it. I wish that I knew who wrote this because it really touched my heart, and I'd like to give credit for it. But we'll just count it as one of many, many hundreds and hundreds of prayers that were said for this congregation. A prayer in the aftermath of the bombing in Oklahoma City. Please join me in a spirit of prayer. May the spirit of love and understanding be present with us this hour, that we might hold tenderly in our hearts and minds the people of Oklahoma City, the innocent victims of senseless violence. We are shaken by the ugliness we see and hear on news reports and talk radio. We are frightened by the awareness of how fragile and precious is the life we take so for granted. We are dismayed by the cold-heartedness of those who would perpetrate such inhumanity against our brothers and sisters. There is much in this world that we cannot control. There is much in this world that happens and we wish it were not so. Thus, we are trapped in the human condition, precious and unique. We are dust and ashes. Beloved of God, we are cut down like grass. May the sorrow we feel remind us that no life is worthless. May the fear we choke down each morning be overshadowed by the power we each have to add a ray of love, a sprig of beauty, a tear of compassion to the infinite possibilities in creation. May the dismay tugging at our will be encouragement to plant fig trees and olive trees that bear fruit we shall never taste. Let this then be our prayer, that we shall never allow our anger, our self-righteousness, or our twisted principles to justify or perpetuate violence and cruelty to any living creature. That we shall not allow our anger, our fear, our demands for justice to harden our hearts against other people and groups of people whom we do not know, and to further separate us from the human family. We pray that just as the people of Oklahoma City have poured out their hearts and hands to serve one another, we too shall live so as to make manifest our common humanity, our shared destiny. We pray that our love and respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person shall prove stronger than the terrorist angry bombs. And finally, we pray that somehow, at some time, the people for whom April the 19th, 1995 shall always be a day of agony and sorrow, shall find a place close to their hearts, where pain turns into song and bitterness into gratitude. This is our prayer, when pray is all we can do. We offer this prayer in the name of every child, of every age, in every land. Each is the hope and the light of the world. Amen. Our closing hymn is Amazing Grace. This was recorded at First Unitarian last year.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace
that grace appear, the hour I first believed.
Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home.
When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less cause to sing God's praise as when we first begun.
That was actually from just recently. It was Chris Gonzalez, Warren Palmer, Lana Henson, and Becky Talent, whose voices you heard. But for right now, I ask everyone, if you have a candle by you, if you have a chalice that you brought, if you could just bring it into the space of your screen so that you can share it with others. And I'll leave you with this image of your community, holding light, holding us all in love. I'm going to play a postlude. It's about 7 minutes long. You can stay here holding your candles, looking at each other for as long as you need, and leave whenever you're ready.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see.
'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed.
Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home.
When God's praise, as when we first began.